Recording in progress.
Okay. Hello, I'm Judith Swack, originator of Healing from the Body Level Up methodology. Welcome to the free webinar on The Impossible is Not Impossible. Ask me anything about how HBLU can help you. So the reason I decided to do this is because it bothers me a lot that people don't know that you can clear traumas and phobias and all kinds of mind-body symptoms and relationship problems and money problems, all this stuff. You can actually clear them up and move on and be successful in all these different areas of your life if you have the right mind-body technology. And people don't know what's available. They don't know that anything's available. And people assume and believe that they just have to live with their damage patterns. And I'm telling you, you don't have to live with your damage patterns. 40 years ago, I started treating people for phobias. It takes 10 minutes to clear a phobia. How many people are still imprisoned by their phobias? Really, when it takes 10 minutes to clear it? How many people have fear of public speaking, fear of flying, fear of driving on the highways, fear of being their true selves? Goodness, that's very sad. And they don't have to live like that. They don't have to. But they think, well, that's the way life is. I just have to live with this. I just have to get around it. I just have to cope with it. I just have to avoid it somehow. And I'm telling you, I'm not interested in coping or avoiding, right? I'm not interested in coping or avoiding. I'm interested in clearing things and being done with it. So I asked people to ask me questions. And I'm going to talk about some of the questions that people have asked me to give you some idea of what's possible. So, first of all, somebody asked, why do people as they age become more fearful of things? Right? Why do they become more fearful? And the answer is because, and I'm going to screen share something with you. I'm going to show you something. So, okay. Look at this lovely picture. So you all heard of the fight or flight reflex. And in the fight or flight reflex, this is your body, your nervous system has a survival mechanism, and it's always searching the environment unconsciously for danger. And in fact, I had a very interesting experience. My husband and I were sleeping, 2:00 in the morning. I wake up and I say, Terry, the house is on fire. I can smell it. He said, I don't smell anything. I'm like, I'm telling you, there's a fire in this house. So we go out of the bedroom. We walk down the hallway. There's no smoke or fire in the first, and I'm following the gradient of the smell because it smells like an electrical fire. And I'm following that gradient down the hall, and I go downstairs, and then there's no fire in the stairwell, but the smell is getting stronger. And then I open up the door to the laundry room, and a puff of smoke comes out. I said, that's what I'm smelling. But after the puff of smoke came out, there was no fire and nothing else happened. So long story short, we called the fire department because I was afraid maybe there was electrical wires burning in the walls or something, and they would be able to detect it. So they came out, there was no fire in the walls, and they could smell the burn smell, but there was nothing else happening. So I get down on my hands and knees and I crawl around, I'm sniffing the floor, and all of a sudden I discover that the panel on the hot water heater smelled. I said, it came from here. The hot water heater must have burned out. And the fire department agreed, and we turned off the electricity to the water heater, and the next day we replaced the water heater, and that was it. But the point is, I was sleeping upstairs with the doors closed, 2 levels, and it woke me up in the middle of the night. I smelled burning. So trust me, your body is always searching the environment for danger, unconsciously, danger, danger, danger. And what happens is when your body gets a danger signal, what happens is, and this is just really beautiful, the sensory system picks up some iffy stuff. It sends it to the amygdala. You've got two of them right there. It sends a signal to your hypothalamus and your pituitary, and it fires off the fight or flight reflex. Okay, boom. And now the fight or flight reflex, you get the rapid heartbeat, you get the adrenaline, the cortisol, you get your liver releasing glucose, you get into fight or flight. Okay. Now, remember, the body really values survival. So now what it's going to do is it's going to remember everything that was in the environment as a possible danger signal. So after you have a phobic reaction to something, after your body experiences or thinks it's in danger, later on in life, anything that you encounter that reminds your body of the original situation triggers off the fight or flight response, and you have a phobic reaction, even though in reality and right now, nothing bad is happening. But your body thinks it's so clever to protect you by keeping a file of sensory clues just in case. And that's a phobia. So what happens is, as you get older, that memory is stored in your body, and you experience more experiences that are traumatic, that are similar, and it stacks up. It literally stacks up in your nervous system. And that's why you keep getting worse, because it just keeps adding energy and adding energy and adding energy. But the good news is, I'm going to show you another diagram. You can use a meridian tapping technique, tapping, right? Which I have a video, people can learn tapping. And you use tapping to activate the calming reflex and turn off the fight or flight. So this is your history, and this is your body. And these are traumatic experiences that you experience over time, okay? And if they're all similar, you don't have to treat the original trauma or the original traumatic experience. You can treat the most recent one, or you can treat the most exaggerated one. And it's still just one imprint repeated. You treat it once and it clears. So that's how you can clear a phobia in 10 minutes. I don't care if you've had it your whole life. I don't care if you've had it forever. I don't care if it, panics you. All you have to do is go back to that scene, figure out what triggers you, activate that trigger. You can do it just in your mind. Imagine that you're in a scene that bothers you, like fear of public speaking. Imagine that you're speaking to some class, or remember the time that you got humiliated in school and the feelings come up, and then you treat it with tapping to release it. So that's why it gets worse over time, because it stacks and accumulates. But nonetheless, you can clear it in 10 minutes. You just have to pull up the imprint and activate the calming reflex. And now your amygdala associates that situation with calm instead of fight or flight. Now, somebody asked me about panic attacks. Let's go back to that picture. So I'm sorry to say that sometimes people grow up in dysfunctional families where they're traumatized a lot. And I see a lot of people who come with panic and anxiety disorder who were raised in families where they were neglected or even worse, abused. And they have to live in that environment day after day. And you can imagine that day after day, their nervous system gets basically assaulted by these traumatic experiences. So the traumatic experiences stack up in the nervous system, right? Stack up. And at some point, you experience one too many examples of that type of trauma. You get neglected one time too many, or you get abused one time too many. And then what happens is 24 to 48 hours later, your nervous system goes over threshold and melts down, and you have a panic attack. because your nervous system can't hold it anymore. It can't store all that trauma. It just overloaded. So when you have this panic attack, you don't realize that it was caused by a history of repeated insults. Okay? You just think, I don't know why I'm panicking. Your conscious mind is really confused. Why am I panicking? And it thinks your body has shut down. And panic attacks can feel very physical. They can feel like a heart attack, or they can feel like you're having a stroke. They can make you faint. I had somebody who had a panic attack. It was the strangest thing. She had a panic attack, and we figured it out because she had a pain in her right side. And this pain was so severe that she went to the emergency room, and they scanned her every possible way you can scan somebody, and they couldn't find anything wrong. There was nothing wrong with her liver, her pancreas, her intestines, her gallbladder, nothing wrong. They checked her kidneys, nothing wrong. And yet she had this terrible, excruciating pain. So they gave her some pain medication, and she went home, and then the pain continued. So she went to a different emergency room. So she ended up going to 3 different emergency rooms. They all checked her. They couldn't find anything wrong. They sent her to a gastroenterologist because they thought there was something wrong with her digestive system. Nobody could find anything wrong. So she came to me and said, the priority goal is heal the pain in my side. Guess what? It was history trauma. She had basically gone over threshold the week before she went on vacation because she had a bad experience at work, and it flipped her out and reminded her of her family with her mean and nasty father, right? And she had a bad experience at work, went on vacation. 2 days later, bang, she's in the emergency room with pain in her side. That's the strangest panic attack symptoms I ever saw. Anyway, we treated her in 1 session. We just went and cleared the whole thing. I'm going to show you the trick to this. We cleared the whole thing, and she said the pain disappeared that session. It was gone that night. And she didn't even bother to tell me because she figured I would know. It's obvious you know that this works. So 6 months later, she comes in for another session because she wants to do a piece of work about her relationship. And she says, oh, by the way, remember when you treated me 6 months ago for that pain in my side? Yep. Well, it was gone that day and it hasn't come back. I'm like, well, thank you for telling me now, right? But here's the trick. So it turns out that, we have a conscious mind. We have a conscious mind, which is our rational mind. Then we have the unconscious mind, which is the land of emotion. And then we have a body, right? And a soul. So when you go over threshold in a history of repeated trauma, and your nervous system melts down, and you show panic attack and PTSD symptoms, what happens is there is a protective mechanism in the unconscious mind called the blocking mechanism. Now, you've probably heard of blocked memories of sexual abuse, where people experience it and they can't remember it, and then later they start having reactions and they think, oh, they must have been molested, but they can't remember it. Well, there is a blocking mechanism, and it works like a circuit breaker when the body experiences a surge of traumatic energy that's so strong that the unconscious mind is afraid that this wave of trauma will overwhelm and drown the conscious mind. So it flips a switch because, again, it's afraid that this surge will either drive you crazy or paralyze you completely, and you won't be able to function. Flips a switch, which is great because then you can walk around and function, but unfortunately, then you still have all these body symptoms. And you don't know where they're coming from, and you don't know what causes them consciously, but it turns out it's history trauma. So when people come in with funny symptoms, I always check them for history trauma because it can cause all kinds of symptoms. And if they have history trauma, we don't go here. We don't go into their history. We don't try to access traumatic memories of childhood, because if you try to go around the blocking part and access the history, you can re-traumatize the client. It's here for a reason. Mm-hmm. So the trick is we don't go into the history. We actually treat the blocking part. We say, where in your body is the resistance to thinking about that stretch of history? And it might be in your stomach. It might be in your throat, wherever it is. And then we just treat that part. We treat the blocking part, and we clear the trauma from the blocking part. And we use tapping for that or other energy psychology techniques. So we clear the trauma that the blocking part feels about thinking about that stretch of history. And as we do that, all of the traumatic energy in the body drains out spontaneously without ever having to go there. Drains out.
There was a question in the chat. Does the client have to believe in HBLU for it to work?
No, but why would they come to see me if they think it didn't?
Or another practitioner or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they come, in reality, they come because they think it might work. But here's the thing. I talk to people before I let them in my practice. I interview people to find out what they want to work on and how much experience they've had with mind-body healing and what are the symptoms, so that I know ahead of time whether HBLU is good for what they've got. So I don't take somebody on unless I think HBLU can help them based on my 40 years of experience. And once in a while, somebody will come in with something that I haven't treated or I don't think HBLU works well for it. And then I will refer them. I'll say, I think neurofeedback works better for this. Or I think you might need medication for this. Or I think you might need to see a nutritionist for this because this sounds like a nutritional problem. And I'll refer them. Right. So basically, I have a very good track record on getting results. And once in a while, somebody will say, I have this issue. I'll say, I haven't worked on that. And I don't know if I can help you, but it sounds like something that HBLU might work for. Are you willing to do the experiment? Because I'm a scientist. Remember, I'm a research scientist. Everything in my world is an experiment. If they say I'm willing to do the experiment, I let them come in and we do the experiment. But I do have a rule that if people aren't getting any better after 8 sessions, this is not right. Because usually if this is going to work, I'll see results in 6 to 8 sessions, if not sooner. Right? So I don't keep people coming forever if I don't think this is going to work for them.
Okay, there's another question. How do you address relationship trauma with HBLU?
Well, I treat it as I do with trauma. So basically, I'm going to show you, I think I have a screen for this. Trauma, yes, I do. I'm going to show you trauma. So, okay, here's trauma. Just a plain trauma. So remember the fight or flight reaction, right? So somebody goes back to the memory where they had a trauma, right? So somebody might have broken up with them. Somebody might have gotten a divorce. And at the moment of initial shock, remember I showed you when the fight or flight reflex goes on and this cascade of hormones goes into your bloodstream and you have a reaction. At that moment, if it's a loss, like a relationship loss, you imprint a trauma. This is the outline of a loss trauma. And you go back to that moment when the trauma happened. You go back in your mind to that moment, and then you test all these major negative emotions, because at that moment, you will experience an imprint in your nervous system, shock and fear, anger and rage. You might even grudge, sadness and sorrow, hurt and pain. And then, of course, you blame yourself. It's my fault because, it's other people's fault because, it's God's fault because. And then anxiety about who will take care of me. People abandon, leave, betray me. I can't trust them. I'm powerless and helpless. I have no control. And I'm bad, unlovable, unwanted, undeserving, and unworthy. Right. All of that imprints in that moment. And then, of course, because you feel you've lost something, you have a feeling of emptiness, which is also known as loss or grief. Then you can have other negative emotions, parts of you that feel you just died inside, other limiting beliefs, irrational thoughts. But I want to get to the point here where we have anticipatory phobias. Let's say you have a loss trauma. Let's say your parents got divorced, and now you have an anticipatory phobia that marriage leads to divorce. How many people have that? But still, you want love. So you get married, but you're always nervous in the back of your mind, in your unconscious mind. You're always nervous that it's going to end sometime. So you're afraid to fight. You're afraid to complain because you're afraid that it'll destroy the relationship, right? So because of the anticipation of loss, you hold back and you're not really authentic and you don't really step forward, work things through. And of course, the unconscious mind, remember that unconscious mind, stores the imprint of relationship patterns. And if you grew up in a family with negative relationships, you imprint those relationships in your unconscious mind. And of course, you reproduce that. So you know that people reproduce dysfunctional family system patterns in their relationships, and you know they reproduce it at work. In other words, they reproduce those negative relationships with everybody they meet because they're programmed to do that in their unconscious mind. So what I do is I check for relationship trauma. Now, let's say, God forbid, it wasn't just a loss, there was violence. Okay? Let's say there was emotional violence or even physical violence during that relationship. And when you experience violence, you imprint the same major negative emotions: shock and fear, anger and rage, grudges, sadness, sorrow, except that now you have a safety issue. Because violence, you feel violated, hence the word violence. So now your boundaries have been violated or breached. You don't feel safe. You feel vulnerable. You're a victim. You're a target. And then you're afraid of people and you don't trust anybody. You can't receive. You have a wall up, right? And then you're afraid of power. I'm powerless or helpless. I have no control. I am bad, unlovable, unwanted, undeserving, unworthy. And then you have a feeling of pollution because you've been violated, right? The rest of it's the same, anticipatory phobias. So the way I get people happily married is we clear any relationship trauma they had in their past so they don't project it forward. And we go in and clear all the dysfunctional family system patterns out of their unconscious mind so they don't unconsciously reproduce that. And then I say to them, now it's safe to date. Right? I say, you can't date till we clear that up. You're not allowed. And once we clear out that garbage from their family system stuff, then I say, okay, now you can date. And then they start dating and it works out. That's how I do relationships. Make sense? All right. So I love getting people happily married. And somebody else asked me about migraines. Well, you know that stress can cause headaches. You've heard of stress headaches. But stress is a meaningless word. So you have to find out what causes stress. History trauma causes major stress. But you could have a physical injury trauma to the brain from getting a blow to the head. You could have had a concussion. You could have a car accident. You could have a stroke. And so one of the most interesting, so you go in and you clear the physical injury trauma to the brain and the functionality comes back on and corrects. So I published a paper on a Vietnam vet. It's on my website, hblu.org, under published papers. And he came in with traumatic brain injury. He was 100% disabled and his eyes looked glazed over. And it turns out that he'd been shot through the head in Vietnam. Then he'd gotten hit over the head with a 2x4, literally, when he was doing construction, and it caused a blood clot that had to be surgically repaired. Then he grew a tumor in that site that had to be removed, and another tumor that had to be removed. So he had 4 surgeries on his brain, and at that point, he was completely disabled. And he had, seizures all day long, shaking all the time. So he came in and I treated him for brain damage history trauma, right? Because repeated brain damage. And guess what? He stopped tremoring, his eyes came back to life, and his brain cleared up, as did his addictions and his depression and a whole bunch of symptoms. So one of the interesting things that I found was I had somebody who had dyslexia, and she was a nurse and she was reversing numbers, and she kept getting fired because she would write down the patient's ID numbers and reverse their numbers, which you can't do. That's really dangerous. And she'd get fired for that. She was okay at the bedside, but not in the writing. So it turns out the goal was cure the OCD. No, cure the dyslexia. That was it. Cure the dyslexia. So we tested her. Now we use muscle testing to find out what's going on inside. Muscle testing is like lie detector testing. And you can muscle test the body and ask yes and no questions. It's a whole science in itself. So her body said that the dyslexia was caused by a physical injury trauma to the brain, and the physical injury trauma to the brain was caused by a high fever in fourth grade. So I said, do you remember having a high fever in fourth grade? I mean, who remembers that? She's 40-something. Who remembers back when you're in fourth grade? But she thought about it and she thought, you know what? I actually do remember it because it was so bad. She ran a high fever, like 104, 105 for 3 days. Who lets your kid run a high fever for 3 days like that? Really. I mean, you dump them in a bathtub, you take them to the doctor, you give them a Tylenol suppository, for God's sake. You don't let a kid run a fever like that for 3 days. Anyway, it did brain damage. It overheated her brain. And she had dyslexia because of it. Well, so we used tapping. We used the trauma outline I just showed you, except we used the word physical in front of it. Did you have any physical shock and fear to your body? Right? Yes, she did. So we used tapping to clear that. At the end of that session, the whole trauma memory was out of her physical body and the dyslexia had cleared. She went back to work. She didn't reverse any numbers anymore. She got another job after that and a better job after that. She let me know that's all it took. Right? So for the person who has misphonia, I would be looking for physical injury trauma to the brain. You could have physical injury trauma to the brain from birth trauma, where, if they had to forceps you out, okay, that's squeezing your brain right there. Not so great. Or you could have had the cord wrapped around and you could be lacking oxygen from birth trauma, right? Even if you're born the normal way, the labor might have been squeezing the placenta, preventing blood flow to your brain. Or you could have had a high fever in childhood. Or you could have banged your head when you fell off your bike or got hit with a baseball while you're playing sports.
Okay, there's another question. Will the traumatic re-imprinting keep coming and leave energy marks in our body from our daily life after we clean it using energy psychology methods?
No, the point is you clear it out and it's gone. It doesn't come back. It only stays if you don't treat it. Right, we erase it. It's gone. And the symptom's correct, and that's that.
We just got another question. Can having seizures at birth cause hearing loss?
Yes, they could. Because you can have physical injury trauma to the brain from seizures. I've also seen people have physical injury trauma to the brain from alcohol poisoning, right? And I actually had somebody who had physical injury trauma to the brain from taking ecstasy. I said to her, how much ecstasy did you take? Apparently, she was kind of a wild woman. And there was a period of time where she took it regularly for, a couple of years at a time because she liked how it made her feel. So she overdid it. Her brain couldn't take it. So we had to treat that.
Can the hearing loss be reversed? Is the next part of that question.
I don't know. Depends on the person. I'd have to do it and see.
You have to muscle test them.
Well, we'd have to do it and see. I did have a woman who came in, her entire left side was partially paralyzed. And she was 50 years old, and she got thrown out of a car at age 19, thrown 50 feet in the air, banged down to the pavement, spent a year in the hospital getting repeated surgeries and so on and so forth. And she was still weak on the entire left side of her body. And the doctor said that the nerves were torn at her neck and that she'd never recover that side of her body. And she was doing physical therapy to help strengthen that side of her body, but it wasn't going to work because she didn't have innervation into her muscles. So I treated her for the physical injury trauma for the accident, and her nerves turned back on.
Somebody just asked, can nerve damage be reversed?
It
So
was.
you just answered that.
Yep, it was. And guess what? She went back to physical therapy. She'd been going for 6 months with no progress. And 3 weeks later, she'd progressed 100%, and they released her and said, now you just need to get a personal trainer.
Right. Okay, somebody else asked, what about shoulders and arm pains and dysfunction due to doing yoga? Upward dog, downward dog. I have had this since 2014.
Yes, I would consider that like a repetitive stress injury, which is a threshold trauma. And I'd go back and clear all the trauma from that motion, the repeated motion. So I'll give you an example. I had a woman who had asthma, and she had been a respiratory therapist. And every time she laughed, she'd get an asthma attack, which is terrible because, can't laugh. So it turns out she had physical injury trauma to her lungs. It was a repetitive trauma because she was working with children with cystic fibrosis. So she would have them come in and check their lung capacity by blowing hard into a respiratory machine. And she would demonstrate live how to blow really hard to this machine. So she must have done this 20 times a day. And after about 3 years, her lungs said, that's it. I'm too irritated with you. You've put too much pressure on me. I can't stand it. Melted down. And then every time she'd laugh, which is a forcible exhale, right? It would trigger a spasm of her lungs, lung spasm. So we treated her for the threshold trauma. That was also one session that cured the asthma caused by excessive exhalation trauma.
Okay, there's a bunch of questions. Okay. Where are we now? Okay. Can you do this work remotely and with a surrogate next to the client if the client is disabled and can't participate on their own?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Can you help with 2 bulged neck discs that are causing shoulder pain?
What I do with that is I clear the physical injury trauma memory to that area of the body because it's holding that anticipatory tension. And the chiropractor can't adjust it because once the chiropractor adjusts it, the body naturally pulls back into the memory of trauma and holds. So people can't hold a chiropractic adjustment when they have physical injury trauma to that area. So what I do is I clear the physical injury trauma to the area so it's not there anymore, and then I send them for physical treatment. So the chiropractic adjustment or whatever they need.
That's what I have. And now it's better. Any experience with glaucoma? I have it pretty severely in my right eye, and I know it's stored trauma from my childhood. I already have considerable damage to my optic nerve.
Well, what I've been able to do with eye problems like macular degeneration and glaucoma is I clear the physical injury trauma out. I clear anything that's causing it. And what happens is it stabilizes and it doesn't get worse. Can I reverse it? I have a colleague. This is funny. I have a colleague and we meet at conferences. And last year we met at a conference and I said, how are you doing? And she said, well, I have macular degeneration. It's genetic. And I see wavy lines in one eye and wavy lines in the other eye. And my grandmother went blind and I have this and there's nothing I can do about it. And I said, well, I think we should put up the goal, cure the macular degeneration. So she starts shouting at me how it's genetic and I can't do anything about it and blah, blah, blah. Now, she's a colleague of mine. So I just look her in the face and I go, excuse me, who are you talking to? This is me you're talking to? She goes, oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, great. Let's do it. So I treated her and her vision actually corrected in one eye right there. Right there. Then we went out for dinner. And then I checked for supplements because there are vitamins that you can take to stabilize or prevent macular degeneration. And I checked to see that her supplements were working properly, found her a couple of other supplements. And then I talked to her last year. No, I talked to her last month, actually. It's been a year. I go, by the way, how are your eyes? She goes, well, it's stabilized and get worse. It's fine. So, you do what you can and you see how far you get. But she did argue with me that it was impossible. And I said, hey, who are you talking to? But I'm going to tell you, I cured somebody else of something interesting. Oh, migraines. I help people with headaches all the time. The headaches, they can come from stress. They can come from trauma. They can cause from physical injuries, right? And they can come from, and stress, which is a meaningless word, can come from a lot of things. So I had somebody who had uncontrollable high blood pressure. And she had genetic high blood pressure in the family. They all had it, so they're all on medication, but hers was uncontrollable. And she was on 3 medications, and then she was spiking uncontrollably. She was in the emergency room like 3 times in 3 months. They put her on 4 medications. She was still spiking uncontrollable blood pressure. And then she thought to call me, and she called me up. So 6 sessions later, her blood pressure was absolutely stable, like butter. And her cardiologist was thrilled and told her she was certain that the work we had done was what had stabilized it. So she got off the 4th medication, she got off the other 2, and she ended up taking 1 pill with 1/2 the dose of 2 medications, and that took care of it. And then we did another 6 sessions to get her on track with her soul mission. But the key, what was driving her crazy, was that her parents had died, and she made a deathbed vow, which is a bad thing to do, that she promised her parents that she would take care of her 2 siblings who basically were lazy bums and expected her to run her parents' business, which wasn't her soul mission, and give them the money while running her parents' business while they were supposed to help out, and they did nothing because they expected she was going to take care of them, and they sat back on their asses. So, 6 sessions later, she told her sister, you want more money? You get a job because I'm not giving you any more money. She told her brother, who was working in the business, he better show up for the meeting. She'd fire him. So then he started showing up. Her sister shut up. Her blood pressure went like this. Then she hired somebody to manage the business, so she only needed to be there 3 days a week. And then she devoted herself to developing her soul mission. That was it. Yep, heart palpitations, heart arrhythmias, that kind of thing.
Okay, there's a couple of more questions. Okay. I have a friend that had a severe back injury a month ago, spent that month in the hospital, but has lasting problems. Possible treatment of nerve and back injury to get mobility. I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, they need to come in and get the physical injury trauma removed from that area. And then we can that'll often release and help repair the nerves. And then to finish repairing nerves, I recommend acupuncture. Acupuncture is the best thing I know for repairing nerve damage after you take the trauma memory out of the body. And you can do some homeopathy and vitamin E. Really good. Yeah.
Do you think vein insufficiency can be healed, or have you seen circulation problems reversed?
I actually haven't worked with that, so I can't tell you.
Huh?
Yeah.
Something you haven't done.
I know, something I haven't actually seen.
Okay. Whoever asked that question, we need to sign you up for an appointment.
Yeah, and we'll do the experiment if you want to do the experiment. Because I don't know.
I don't know.
I like working with families too. Right. And I had this woman, this is one of the funniest things. She had a bad personality. She was nasty. And she was so nasty that her husband divorced her, and her only child, her daughter, basically disconnected, wouldn't speak to her for years. So she finally came in to see me. I guess one of her friends referred her, and she came in and she said, I have a bad personality. I'm so nasty. I drove everybody in my family away from me. I said, all right, then. Well, let's heal that. So we put up the goal, repair my relationships with my family or have a good relationship with my family. And we cleared the patterns inside of her that made her so nasty. And she got nice. And then she actually sent a letter, because her daughter wanted to talk to her. She had a letter by mail to her daughter that said she was doing some mind-body healing. She knew she had a nasty personality and she was working on it. And that she'd like her daughter to reconnect with her just to find out how much better her behavior was now and how much easier she was to get along with. And so her daughter actually did respond and came to visit her for like a half an hour. I'm going to sit for you with half an hour and just see. And she felt the difference because all that angst inside the woman was gone and she wasn't nasty anymore. So, and then guess what? The daughter ended up moving back in with her.
Yeah, so somebody just said like it had a more of a personality replacement than
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah. Right. But I want people to understand that at the soul level, we are God energy. We are light, right? We are pure energy. We are fine at the soul level. So there's nothing wrong with our actual true self and our true identity. But we accumulate garbage and we misidentify behavior as identity. No, you act a certain way. That's how you act. That's not who you are. You're not your actions. You're not your beliefs. You're not your damage. So I had somebody come in the other day and say, my boyfriend has a fear of commitment and I can't be with somebody like that. I said, there's nothing wrong with him. And she told me that he had been traumatized by his first girlfriend, the love of his life, and that he was afraid to commit again. I said, so the deal here is there's nothing wrong with him, but he has trauma. And the trauma that he's carrying, now listen to the words carrying, the trauma that he is carrying from that girlfriend is being triggered by any other romantic relationship, not just you personally. So the fact that he's been able to be with you to some degree for 4 years means that his damage isn't completely owning him, but it's enough to sabotage your relationship. So call him up and tell him that you love him, you want the relationship to continue, but the damage that he's carrying, not who he is, but the damage that he's carrying is interfering in the relationship. And you recommend that he come see me or somebody who can do energy psychology and clear the trauma memory out of his body so it doesn't sabotage him and the relationship, right? So I never use the word change. You don't need to change. You be who you are, which is pure and beautiful, and then clear the crap that's not you, that's running you, that isn't working. That's all. Just clear the blocks and be done with it. Move on, because you're fundamentally fine. You just need to unload, right? So we clear dysfunctional. Weight loss I want to talk about. So weight loss is often a dysfunctional family system patterns that have to do with neglect. So somebody who is overweight and can't manage their physiology, it's because they've been neglected and they've internalized the family pattern of neglect. So they self-neglect. So these people will take care of everybody else before they'll take care of themselves. They have a hard time really paying attention to themselves consistently and nurturing and taking care of and loving themselves properly to take care of this body because they've been trained to neglect themselves. And you get patterns also in the personality structure. We use the Enneagram model of personality for that. And we upgrade the personality. So really, overweight is about being unable to care for yourself.
So I have a question. Is it the same for somebody who has an eating disorder? Would it be the same thing?
An eating disorder is similar, but it's not about self-neglect. An eating disorder is about family system and cultural brainwashing patterns. But I can clear those patterns. I have a list. I think there are about I have a list of, I don't know, either 13 or 23 different patterns that sabotage weight loss. But those are the major themes.
Okay.
All right. So is there anything else I wanted to mention? Yeah, and if you ask, what do people typically come to see me for? The largest percentage of people come to see me for anxiety and depression. Right? And I feel anxious, I feel depressed. So this is very interesting. I had a guy the other day, and I was testing him, and I wanted to see if he had birth trauma because I had I have an intake form, and I just check for standard things that people experience. And birth is really hard on people's bodies, and they often have birth trauma. So I was checking him through my form, and it said he had birth trauma. And I asked if that was the priority to treat, and it was. So we went back and cleared him of birth trauma. And it turns out that his mother was completely anesthetized, and he was pulled out by forceps. And this is in the old days. I won't tell you how old he is, and then they held him up by his feet and spanked him to get him to breathe, which is violence. I'm going to tell you this. That's violence. So he got yanked out by the head, and he got hit with violence. And he concluded through normal trauma logic that the world is not safe and nobody wants him. And they're trying to kill him. Right? Baby logic. So, of course, he grew up. Of course, he did fine. He's very successful in his career. He's happily married. He has a life. He's healthy. But I just picked up birth trauma. I said, let's clear this. When we cleared it, he finally said, you know what? I have had this undercurrent of anxiety my entire life. In the background, I always feel anxious. And it's gone. And who knew? Who had any idea that was caused by birth trauma? No idea. One session. His lifelong anxiety disappeared one session. So that's the deal. You have to be able to find it, and then you have to be able to treat it. So in my 40 years, I basically started mapping the patterns that cause the problem, whether they're at the body level or the unconscious level or the soul level or even the conscious level. I've mapped the patterns. I have a menu of 52 techniques that work with the right energies at the right level to erase them, which is the point. When I say clear, I mean erase it so it's gone and not a problem anymore. And so that's how I find these things, because I made lists of patterns and lists of techniques, and then we muscle test and ask the client's deepest wisdom to say what the priority goal is and what's interfering and what's the best technique. And that's why it works, because it's mix and match by individual. No session's ever the same. No person's ever the same. And their soul leads the healing, and that's why we get good results.
Okay.
And I get people happily married. I get their bodies back together. I heal family systems. I'm into it.
When somebody asked a question. When remembered incest at the age of 44, I gained 70 pounds, decades of therapy, and still overweight. What do you recommend? Do you teach and certify in tapping? That's a great question to talk about.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to talk about that.
Go ahead.
So you accessed a blocked memory. And remember, I showed you the blocking mechanism? You went around it and re-traumatized yourself. And then you started eating. So we'd have to go back. We'd have to clear the blocking part. And then, which will drain out whatever was in the original memory. And then you won't have anything to react to and you'll be able to lose weight. Yes. So here's the thing. I'm really upset that people are suffering for no good reason just because they don't know what's available or what's possible, and they just assume that they're stuck with it. That bothers me. So I'm on a crusade right now to train as many healing professionals as I can in this method so that they can go heal people the same way I do. And my next training is coming up. It starts September 29th, Healing from the Body Level Up, where I teach you how to clear history trauma and cure brain damage. That's module 1, right? And so we're going to be sending you a recording of this, and we're going to send you the link to go to my training website and sign up to take the training. Right? If you're a healing professional, train with me and help people really quick and completely and practically painlessly to really move on in their lives and get unstuck. And
Sorry.
I'm training more people to work with individuals so more individuals have this available to them. I also do have some room in my practice, so you can go to my website and you can sign up for a free 15-minute consult, and I'll check and see if what HBLU has in its repertoire will help you with whatever. We can get you into my schedule. Okay.
2 more quick questions I think we have time for. What about your arm? What if your arm's hurt and you can't do muscle testing and tapping is difficult? What would you do?
I have 52 techniques on my menu, and your deepest wisdom wouldn't call for it if it wasn't comfortable for you. Right.
Somebody asked, have you ever considered speaking at Canyon Ranch in Lenox, and or I would say probably Kripalu? Have you ever considered that?
I did consider Kripalu, but they said, and this was many years ago, and they said I wasn't famous enough to attract business for them. Right. Canyon Ranch, I don't know. I mean, it didn't really strike me. I want to train people how to do this. Right. And it's a 5-day training. Canyon Ranch isn't really set up for those kind of programs.
Does your training qualify for CEU credits? Yes, it
Yes,
does.
it does.
The HBLU one does. I think.
Yep.
What are we at? 15? 15? I think it's 15. I don't remember off the top of my head.
I think 36
36 credits. Yeah.
36 credits. State of Massachusetts, 36 credits. Let me see. Let me screen
I don't
share.
remember off the top of my head. It's bad.
Yeah, it's a lot. Oops, not this one. Hold on, I'm screen sharing. I feel technically semi-literate. Where is that one? I don't know. It's weird. Here it is.
Have you ever, while you're looking for that, have you ever cleared prostate cancer? Ooh. Mm-hmm.
I actually keep track of everything. I have a Rolodex. Here it is. Can you see this? Am I screen sharing?
Yeah. It's just a Word document.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is my training website, training.hblu.org. And this is my my regular website. And we'll be sending you an email with links to these. Prostate cancer. I have to clear people of diagnosis shock. Anytime they have cancer, they have diagnosis shock, and then they're not really good about coordinating their treatment. But I keep track of what works, and people give me the information. So I have people who tell me what the best treatment is for prostate cancer. And just recently, I had a guy who had prostate cancer, or well, anyway, he had benign prostate hyperplasia. I'm not sure if they can do this for prostate cancer, but at the Mass General in their urology department, they have a new surgery where they just go in through the urethra and they can just go into the prostate and put a little laser and melt and suck out the interior of the prostate, leaving the shell, the shell, so it doesn't, they don't have to take anything out, and it leaves people really intact and just sucks out the insides of the prostate. Yeah. So I keep track of that. I keep track of the latest things. All right.
Okay, hold on. Somebody said, I recently trained with Module 1 with Hillary, new practitioner here. And oops, wait, where do we go? Uh-oh, hold on.
Well, I just want you to know that Hillary Strauss is one of my top people. She's Module 6 postgraduate trained, and she's teaching HBLU 1 now in Florida, I'm happy to say. And I've gotten very good reports about Hillary and her teaching. She's a delight.
Yeah. So you need to take 2 now.
Well, I'm co-teaching with Michelle Wilson by Zoom. It's a Zoom class in September, and Hillary is going to teach it live. She's taught 2 classes live already, and we're talking to her about doing it live again in October in Florida. We don't have dates for that yet. All right, are we done?
I think so. Any other last questions?
All right, so come train with me, help a lot of people, have a lot of fun with it, and if you want to work on something, sign up for a consult, a free consult, and I'll see what we can do to help you. All right? So anything is possible. Tell your friends.
Thank you,
Thank
Judy.
you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yes.